Eventually, you people learn that Captain David Porter is my historical figure of interest by these antique books I have. You guys don't know about this one because I mentioned these two before. We have the first and second edition of Captain Porter's Journal into the Pacific. But this one right here is a memoir written by Captain David Porter's son, Admiral David Dixon Porter, who served during the American Civil War. Unfortunately, when I bought this was in pristine condition, but I bought it to read it, and as soon as I opened the book to go through the pages, this biography was a good book to read because when you're writing about your subject, you're having such close connections. I mean, of course, you're going to have information that no one else will have access to, letters, events, just you already have the experience of being with this person. And so, of course, when you write it down, you are pretty reliable as far as facts go, you would think. Unfortunately, with Admiral Porter being the son of Commodore Porter, there's a little bit of bias because the court-martial really skewed Admiral Porter's ideas, views of his father based off the court-martial that his father faced. Quite honestly, let's be real. If you're going to write a whole biography about somebody, especially your father, conveniently or Admiral Porter did us a disservice of not including the entire chapter of Commodore David Porter's life when he was involved with a cabal, for lack of a better word, with the government of Chile, which is included in this biography by a historian named David Long. Opinion, I think that David Long was a revisionist, just because there's some things I don't agree with Mr. Long, but I have no way of backing up. I cannot create a compelling argument about his takes about Commodore David Porter. Commodore David Porter is one of the most illustrious, colorful figures of the early years of the United States Navy. However, the most controversial event in his entire career, in my opinion, would be the Fajardo affair, or the Fajardo affair, when he was fighting pirates in the West Indies. I am by no means an actual historian or scholar, and so these are my own personal opinions. Honestly, what do I know? I only read the books about it, so I am not well versed in international law and all those other things. But basically the short, easy, simple version of it was Captain Porter was fighting pirates in the West Indies, and on the island of Puerto Rico, one of his lieutenants was investigating about a stolen U.S. merchant ship, and so he went ashore and got arrested by Spanish authorities because he was wearing civilian clothes. Captain Porter, he was livid about the disrespect that his lieutenant received, and so he invaded Puerto Rico demanding an apology, and the government in Washington were in complete outrage because Captain Porter overstepped. This event led to Commodore Porter's court-martial during August 1825, and this case was the most publicized military case in this whole period because newspapers covered it. It was such a big deal, mostly because Commodore Porter, affectionately, he was a loudmouth, and he was always in a newspaper war with somebody, and so he always had something to say. And so I understand where he's coming from, but he was not really helping himself when he angered President at the time, John Quincy Adams, about this. I will have to make a whole separate video about this. I am not well informed. I do not understand the laws, the military laws of all this. And so I can only have a blanket explanation of it. I can only give a blanket explanation of it, but in the end of it all, this led to Commodore David Porter resigning from the United States Navy after he served ever since the Quasi War. As a son so affectionately loves his father, this is what Admiral David Dixon Porter wrote about Commodore David Porter. A nation in this respect too often resembles a crowd of boys who labor through a winter's day with a half-dozen limbs to raise a colossal image of snow, and when finished they scarce take time to admire their work before battering it to pieces. Such treatment is too often the penalty of greatness. The higher a man ascends, the more conspicuous object he becomes for detraction, and few would incur the penalty if they could anticipate it, even for the highest honors. It is a singular fact, which, though probably unknown to Commodore Porter, is now a matter of history, that the head of the administration which pursued him so relentlessly for a supposed violation of the neutrality of Spain should have interposed his powerful influence to shield General Jackson at the time of his celebrated invasion of Florida. Of all the members of Mr. Monroe's cabinet, Mr. John Q. Adams, then Secretary of State, alone upheld and applauded the conduct of the hero of New Orleans, and it is certain that, but for Mr. Adams' support, Jackson would have been recalled and treated as Commodore Porter was subsequently for a similar offense. It is plain enough from the above circumstances that Mr. Adams could not have considered the Commodore's conduct at Foxardo otherwise than proper, and consequently the only real charge against him, so far as the administration was concerned, falls to the ground. Admiral David Dixon Porter was a young boy when his father was disgraced, and so he would carry this memory with him for the rest of his life. Acting midshipman Porter would vow to himself that enemies of the father would become the enemies of the son. And so when he was under command of Captain Alexander Wadsworth, who was a member on of the court during Captain Porter's trial, the younger Porter would basically do anything he can to anger Captain Wadsworth's insubordination, to the point where Captain Wadsworth didn't want to give him the warrant, the midshipman warrant. So it just so happened that an old friend turned enemy, Commodore James Biddle, who ranked Captain Wadsworth, when he heard about it. James Biddle, he was also on the court who found Captain Porter guilty, but there was some guilt within him that he didn't want to admit to the father. And so Commodore James Biddle, he said, you know what, as an act of good gesture to Commodore Porter, give him his warrant. But that did not heal the old friendship that was once shared between Commodores David Porter and James Biddle. Something that we don't consider is the fact that children watch the adults. When they grow up, they create a reaction to the adults' action.